listeners. Thank you for being here again for our weekly podcast, the Class Action Weekly Wire. I'm Jennifer Riley, partner at Duane Morris, and joining me today are Shireen Wetmore and Eden Anderson. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, guys.
Thank you, Jen. Happy to be part of the podcast.
Thanks, Jen. I'm glad to be here.
So today on the podcast, we are discussing the recent publication of this year's edition of the Duane Morris Private Attorneys General Act, or PAGA review. Listeners can find the ebook publication on our blog, the Duane Morris Class Action Defense blog. Shireen, can you start by telling our listeners a little bit about the publication?
Absolutely, Jen. As a quick refresher for our audience, California's Private Attorneys General Act is a statute that authorizes employees to step into the shoes of the California Labor Commissioner and sue their employers for civil penalties under the Labor Code. As has been the case for really the past decade, claims filed under the PAGA continue to be among the most popular filed in California wage and hour matters. Frequently, these claims are preferred by plaintiffs over class actions because of the limited standing requirements and the ability for plaintiffs to bring class-like representative claims without class certification requirements and the ability to avoid removal to federal court. The PAGA reforms in June of last year are starting to change how these cases are litigated and when they're brought. But by all accounts, 2024 was a very active year on the PAGA litigation front. And to assist with understanding what this means for employers facing PAGA claims, Duane Morris has released the Duane Morris PAGA Review, the latest edition of this annual publication. And it analyzes key PAGA rulings and litigation developments in 2024 and the significant trends that are apt to impact these types of representative actions in 2025. So we hope that companies and employers will benefit from this resource as they work to keep up with these evolving laws and standards.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview, Shireen. Eden, what are some of the key takeaways from the publication in regard to PAGA litigation in 2024?
Yeah, according to data maintained by California's Department of Industrial Relations, the number of PAGA notices filed with the LWDA has increased exponentially over the past 2 decades and was the highest number ever in 2024. With that said, we saw legislative change to PAGA in July of 2024. The amendments to PAGA now provide employers with greater ability to cure violations and avoid litigation, caps on penalties that can be imposed, requirements for PAGA cases to be manageable, and limits on statutory standing so that a PAGA plaintiff can now only seek penalties for violations that they personally suffered and which affected other employees. We're just starting to see how those amendments are affecting PAGA litigation, but we anticipate they won't stop the plaintiff's bar from continuing to pursue these claims in droves.
Interesting. And this area is certainly evolving quickly. Shireen, can you tell our listeners about some of the developments that occurred during 2024 in particular?
Well, as Eden said, the PAGA reforms significantly modified PAGA, and they will impact both how and when employees bring these claims and how employers will respond to them. But there are thousands and thousands of pre-reform PAGA claims that are still in the pipeline, and that will be subject to some of the significant rulings from 2024. So in 2024, we saw development of a new strategy that became significantly more popular amongst plaintiffs following the California Supreme Court's ruling in Adolph v. Uber. And that's the case which addressed the arbitration of individual PAGA claims and held that so long as an employee asserts that they're an aggrieved employee, they maintain standing to pursue a representative claim in court under PAGA. Adolph clarified that should the employee lose their individual claim in arbitration, the employee would also lose standing to maintain a representative PAGA claim in court. However, if the employee prevailed in arbitration or settled their individual PAGA claim, they would maintain standing to pursue non-individual representative PAGA claims on behalf of all other aggrieved employees. What we saw in 2024 in reaction to those holdings was that plaintiffs began filing PAGA claims with only representative components purporting to waive their individual PAGA claims as a workaround. These so-called headless claims seemingly go against the ruling in Adolph and other cases.
Thank you so much, Shireen. How has that headless PAGA strategy played out for the plaintiffs in terms of, well, has it worked?
Well, there's been an update in this area even after publication of our book. Back in April of 2024, the California Court of Appeal held in Valderas versus Fresh Start Harvesting that represented PAGA claims could still be maintained, even without an actionable individual PAGA claim, so long as the plaintiff alleges he or she suffered a labor code violation. And as Shireen mentioned, the plaintiff's bar began relying on Balderas to support their strategy to avoid arbitration. And that strategy was to disclaim individual recovery in PAGA cases. But then in late December 2024, the Court of Appeal reversed course and held in Leeper versus Shipped that a PAGA action necessarily includes both representative and individual PAGA claims, and that a plaintiff cannot disclaim individual relief to avoid arbitration. And this is an issue that ultimately the California Supreme Court may need to weigh in on.
Thanks so much, Eden. Let's talk briefly about the Turrieta case. On August 1, 2024, the California Supreme Court issued an opinion that had major ramifications for employers in PAGA actions, particularly where there's parallel litigation pending. Shireen, can you walk us through the key points of that decision?
The key issue in Turrieta v. Lyft was whether plaintiffs in separate PAGA actions could intervene, object to a settlement, or challenge the judgment in another parallel, as you said, PAGA matter. Specifically in Turrieta, the parties had reached a settlement and the proposed intervener plaintiffs sought to inject themselves into the case. The court ruled that as non-parties to the settlement, the other plaintiffs did not have standing to intervene or object to the settlement. This means that an employer should be able to settle one PAGA action without fear of interference from other plaintiffs who may be pursuing similar parallel claims. Such settlements will still require court approval, which is the backstop to ensure there are no shenanigans in the settlement process.
Wow, that's a pretty big ruling. Eden, what do you think that really means for employers facing multiple overlapping PAGA actions, as so many employers are in California right now?
Yeah, Jen, it's a game changer. Employers now have more leeway to settle PAGA claims without worrying about other plaintiffs from different cases coming in and objecting to or trying to disrupt the settlement. The Turrieta court emphasized that having multiple plaintiffs intervening would complicate the litigation and hinder the enforcement of labor laws, which is exactly what PAGA was designed to avoid. And this decision really solidifies an employer's ability to resolve PAGA cases without interference from other plaintiffs.
So this decision seems like a win for employers. Let's shift gears to Estrada versus Royalty Carpet Mills, which may be described as not a win for employers. The court issued another important ruling in 2024. What did the court decide in that case, and why does it matter?
Yeah, in Estrada, the California Supreme Court addressed whether trial courts can dismiss PAGA claims if they're too unwieldy and not manageable. And the case involved a large class of employees, and the trial court decertified the class and then dismissed the PAGA claims for lack of manageability. And the California Supreme Court held that trial courts do not have inherent authority to dismiss PAGA claims due to lack of manageability. And what that means is that for PAGA cases that were filed before the recent legislative amendments, employers can no longer argue that a PAGA case should be dismissed because it's just too complex or unmanageable. However, as I mentioned earlier, for newly filed PAGA cases, the recent amendments recognize and codify a manageability defense.
Thanks, Eden. Shireen, do you think that that decision will change the way courts can handle PAGA cases moving forward?
Yes, definitely. I think it will, in a couple of ways that remain to be seen. The Supreme Court clarified, as Eden said, that the manageability of a case isn't a valid reason to dismiss a PAGA claim under old PAGA. Unlike class action cases, pre-reform PAGA suits are not bound by the same requirements for manageability. And so Estrada essentially removed that key defense for employers trying to get out of these unwieldy PAGA actions and makes it harder to avoid facing the full scope of PAGA claims. However, the Supreme Court emphasized the need for prudence from plaintiffs and suggested that plaintiffs need to be careful on how they represent their claims. The result is likely twofold. For pre-reform cases, there may be more scrutiny of the sufficiency of the notice itself, which is now the primary method for managing the scope of pre-reform PAGA claims. Similarly, the reforms from the legislature, which explicitly include manageability, may influence how courts review the intended scope of the pre-reform PAGA claims. And certainly we anticipate that manageability will be a key tool for employers in addressing post-reform PAGA claims.
Great insights into these rulings, ladies. And it seems like 2024 was a pivotal year for PAGA law in California. We will continue to track all of these important PAGA rulings and developments and share the implications with our loyal blog readers. Thanks, Shireen and Eden, for being here today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Please stop by the blog for a free copy of the PAGA Review ebook.
Thank you for having me, Jen, and thank you, listeners.
Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time.